It is management's job to see the company not as it is, but as it could become. But sometimes there are things that occur in the environment that we simply can't forecast. We call these strategic inflection points. And what we will do if we are faced with a strategic inflection point is we will have to go back to the drawing board and sometimes dramatically change the way we do business. So, examples of strategic inflection points in recent history, well, number one would be the deregulation of the airline industry that occurred in the 1970s and really required the airline industry as a whole to rethink the way they do business and change their operations altogether. And that's continuing today. The airline industry is one of the most challenging industries to compete in today in terms of making a profit. Another example that I'm sure you're familiar with is growth in the use of the internet as a retail outlet. And that has been very recent, hasn't it? It's changed the way that most companies, especially in the retail industry, the way that they do business. A board of directors is a body of elected or appointed members who jointly oversee the activities of a company. In a publicly traded company, probably the most important responsibility of the board of directors is to take care of shareholder interests. Sometimes we call the board of directors the board of trustees or board of governors or simply the executive board. Sometimes we just refer to them as the board. The board is elected by the stockholders in a publicly traded company, and it is the highest authority in management, and they are to oversee the CEO. Hiring and firing the CEO is one of their primary responsibilities. The control of the company is divided between the board of directors and the shareholders, but in practice, the amount of power exercised by the board varies with the type of company. In larger companies, the board simply has more power. Let's talk about corporate ethics and social responsibility and top management's role in it. But first of all, why is this such an important topic? You probably have a chapter and you've talked about it in every course that you've taken in business, or just about every course. So, why is it something that we're focused on today? Is it because there are simply more ethical dilemmas, and you see some examples there in recent history? I don't think so. I think it's because of the 24-hour information access world that we now live in. More likely to get caught, and the consequences are higher. It makes a bad ethical choice a public relations nightmare. So companies are now probably more vulnerable to the consequences of bad choices, and the consequences include not only financial loss due to potential penalties and fines, but also the loss of customer goodwill. More importantly, the loss of customer goodwill. So again, what is ethical behavior? It is subjective, and this is the reason why we need to sort of take charge of this in our company as managers in our company and focus on employee training. What's legal is clear. What is ethical differs from individual to individual.
And finally, ethics. Here's the truth. In most organizations, in most endeavors, if you do things that are kind of on the line and on the edge, you can get better results in the short term. It's why a lot of businesses tolerate behavior that's on the edge, because it sometimes produces better results in the short term. Values are what guide your behavior when no one's looking and you don't think anyone's going to find out. I believe a leader's most important job is to make sure that everybody understands that actually values matter and ethics count. And you know what? We're not going to do stuff on the edge, because what happens when people do things on the edge is eventually they walk over the line. And when they walk over the line, devastating things happen. Because in this era of always on communication and information, you can't hide anything anymore. And people are going to find out. So you can't get close to the edge. You have to really stay true to a set of ethics and values. And yes, there is some variation on ethics and values around the world, but most of the time, people understand what's on the edge and what's not.
One of the reasons why ethical decisions are not always clear cut and why there are many different perspectives is that there are different ways that you could view the same situation. One way is called the utilitarian view. And it requires that you really ask 3 questions. And I actually had a manager, one of my first jobs out of college was in sales. I had a sales manager who said this to me: if you could answer yes to all 3 questions, then do it. Well, I can think of situations where I could actually answer yes to all 3 questions, and it wouldn't be a good idea to do it. It would be unethical and maybe even illegal. The questions are, if it's good for you, if it's good for the company and good for the customer, you should do it. I don't think that is sufficient. Another way of looking at it is the individual rights view, where we're taking an individual approach and asking ourselves, is it fundamentally right to do this? If I put myself in their shoes, would it be right? Would I feel that it's right? A third way is the justice view, which really looking at more of a global approach and looking at the processes used to make the decision. Is it fair and impartial to everyone involved? So what is the right way? I think using a combination, yes, is it good for me, good for the company, good for the customer, but also does it satisfy all of the company's stakeholders? Does it respect the rights of the individuals involved? And is it just to all the parties involved? The 2 types of justice you could talk about: distributive justice is the fairness of the outcome. Procedural justice is the fairness of the procedures used to determine the outcome. So an example might be, well, maybe you applied for a job, you really wanted the job, but you didn't get the job. So you might think that's not fair, but when you look into it, you find out the person who did get the job was much more qualified for it, has more experience or more education. So you might think the procedures used then were fair. You'll be more likely, still not going to be happy about it, but you'll be more likely to be satisfied with the decision, not be upset by the decision, if you feel that procedures used are fair. So procedural justice, looking at the 2, is more important, making sure that the processes used are fair and impartial to everyone involved. So what can managers do to promote ethical behaviors? Well, here's just some tips, some things, guidelines. And one, yes, do have a code of ethics, but not just have a piece of paper on your physical bulletin board in the building, but also communicate it. Have it on your website. Remind employees, maybe even at the annual meeting, this is our code of ethics. Hire people who exemplify, have the same values and walk the walk, so to speak, are ethical in their approach to day-to-day decision making. Make sure that you evaluate and promote employees on their behaviors, on ethical performance, not just objective results. As Carly Fiorona pointed out, it's much easier oftentimes to get the short-term results using behaviors, making decisions that are a little bit on the edge, that are not necessarily as ethical as we would like them to be. Provide employee training and role-playing, especially if you're dealing with a sales force. What are the typical ethical dilemmas that an employee might be faced with on a day-to-day basis on their jobs? Here's an important one: encouraging whistleblowing, but we need to make sure that whistleblowers are kept anonymous. It has been shown that people are less likely to do things that are unethical or illegal if they feel they'll get caught. If the likelihood of getting caught goes up, the likelihood of doing the behavior goes down.
So the question is, how do you deal with ethics in an organization? Because it's intangible. It's not profit, it's not products. And it's a really important question. So the thing that I would say about values of any kind, but particularly the values of integrity, respect, trust, things that are very core to human beings, but very insubstantial in terms of an income statement or balance sheet, is you got to walk the walk. Nobody cares about the talk. You can put 100 value statements on the wall. It doesn't matter. And there are two things that people watch for when they see if you're walking the walk. The first thing people watch for is who gets promoted. Who gets promoted? The truth is everybody knows in an organization who has a lot of integrity and who doesn't. People know who's kind of walking on the edge to produce the results. And if those are the people that get promoted, then people get the message. One of the hardest things I ever had to do in my career was fire somebody. Fire a particular person. He had incredible potential. He was incredibly smart. He got great results. But he was doing things that we would fire an employee for. He was an executive. He reported to me. He was doing things we would fire an employee for. He was not truthful. He was abusing the resources of the company. Now, people said to me, you know what? You don't have to fire him. But I did. Because had he stayed, by the way, everybody knew what he was doing. Had he stayed, everyone would have gotten the message. In the press, I was blamed for his departure. You know, she's such a terrible person, he couldn't work for her. It's okay. It's not about getting credit on the outside. But people on the inside knew what that meant. So who gets promoted? The second thing is you have to be upfront with people that this is what you expect. You have to tell them that. And so if you're going to go through performance evaluations, that has to be part of the performance evaluation. It can't just be the numbers. If values are going to matter, if you, for example, believe that collaboration is an important skill, then you have to coach, develop people on the basis of their collaboration skills. You have to measure their performance based on their ability to collaborate. So, how do you measure performance? What kind of coaching and development do you give people? Who gets promoted? Those are all the things that matter.
So related to ethics is the topic of social responsibility. You know, what is social responsibility? The underlying thesis of it is that a company really has a duty to not only display a social conscience in operating its business, but also take into account how managerial decisions and company actions affect the well-being of not just society at large, but also its employees, local communities, and the environment. Now, most people, when you use the term social responsibility, they think of environmental sustainability, and that's one aspect of it. Really, you could categorize a company's social responsibility into 5 different categories or components. One of them is protecting and sustaining the environment, but also you could look internally to the company, their actions to promote workforce diversity and to enhance employee well-being and make the company a great place to work. Well, that just makes good business sense as well, because there is a lot of research in the area of employee job satisfaction that has shown a connection between employee job satisfaction and the lowering of employee withdrawal behavior, such as employee absenteeism and turnover. So it makes good business sense. It's not just about operating ethically and giving to charity and protecting and sustaining the environment. Those are all aspects of a social responsibility program, but it's also about taking care of your employees and promoting workforce diversity. And there are all kinds of good reasons for doing that. It makes good business sense. So you could argue, well, it's the right thing to do. But we can also say that it's not just our job as a responsible citizen, um, but it makes good business. Some people would argue that businesses should be socially responsible because it's morally the right thing to do. But, interestingly, what we have also found through research is that the companies that are the most socially responsible, surprise, surprise, these are also the companies that are the most profitable. They tend to be more progressive, more forward thinking. So, what you do with your customers and society as a whole can also lead to customer loyalty. So you can differentiate, you can create a uniqueness based on being socially responsible. A lot of companies are moving in that direction today. Companies that are more socially responsible tend to have higher brand image and higher brand loyalty. So there can be positive profit effects of being socially responsible as well. It costs money, but it also can lead to more customer satisfaction.